Story 1. Packed up my whole life in 3 trash bags, moved 800 miles, and somehow ended up with better friends, better food, and much better dating options. Zero regrets except maybe not doing it sooner. Story 2. Moved from Texas to Minnesota when I was 20, and it was the best decision. I am 1,000 miles north of all the family drama. Being away from them made my life better, calmer, and more confident. I met my husband here, and I have lived in Minnesota since 1987. I consider myself a Minnesotan, not a Texan. Story 3. I had finished a graduate degree and ended up back in my small Midwest hometown with a decent but unfulfilling job. My days involved mind-numbing teaching, gym workouts, and hanging out with my old high school friends. I was unhappy with how my life was turning into a suburban routine focused on ball games and barbecues, though I mean no offense to those who enjoy that lifestyle. One day, I decided to pack an old suitcase and move to New York City with about $800 to my name. It took 2 days from the moment I made the decision until I found a sublet in a very poor apartment. I initially had unpleasant work but enough to get by, then secured a much better junior position which I used to advance to better jobs. I stayed and grew there for 14 years, then moved to London for the last decade. I am glad I had that old suitcase. Story 4. Moved from Eastern Canada to Western United States in 2006, and for the most part, it is going very well. Might move back soon, though. The last 6 months have given me a headache. Story 5. I am from the Midwest. When I turned 21, I moved down south to Houston. I lived there for 2.5 years, and it was actually pretty amazing. However, it was the conservative South. Even though Houston was a fairly liberal city for Texas, it was still too conservative for me. Then I moved to New York and lived there for a year before moving and living in Italy and Canada for a year each. Then I returned to the Midwest. I have now been on the West Coast for the past 4 years. Honestly, it depends on the type of person you are. There is nothing wrong with wanting to stay where you are comfortable and where you have a support group of friends and family. There is nothing wrong with wanting to explore. I actually did not like living in New York. It is still an experience that I am glad I had though. Everywhere else I have lived, I have always found something to love about it. If you have never moved away from home before, my biggest piece of advice would be to give it 5 to 6 months once you do move. Homesickness usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 months to finally disappear and for you to be able to fully embrace a new place and give it a chance. Story 6. I grew up in Russia. An incomplete list of Russian proverbs related to emigration includes, "Life is always good wherever we are not sarcastic. You bring your problems with you wherever you go. Out there, no one needs you." This implies that someone needs you where you were born and raised. I moved to Portugal without ever having been there before. I would have done an exploratory trip, but the pandemic prevented it. The taxi ride from the airport to my temporary apartment was dark, passing Lisbon murals and white houses with red roofs. I thought, I have a home now. A year later, I went from mainland Portugal to the islands for a couple of months. When I walked out of the airport, I breathed in and thought, here precisely I want to live, die, and haunt ever after. It has been 4 years in total. I have done many things that I did not have the energy to do before. I learned to drive, grew my income, bought a house, lost weight, and sorted out some health issues. It has been good. I am very lucky. Story 7. Fantastic. I put on a backpack after high school in Australia to travel Southeast Asia, ending up in the United Kingdom after a year. I lived there for a decade before moving to the United States. I have been here for 20 years, have a German wife, and spend a lot of our time traveling between work. Story 8. It turned out fantastic. I left home in 1974 because I could see how my life was going to unfold, the same as other girls and women in that area. I joined the Navy and life has been good. There have been ups and downs, of course, but if I had stayed in southern Indiana, I would have never met my husband, traveled the world, had our daughter, gained 2 marvelous granddaughters, expanded my mind and worldview, and had so much fun along the way. Not a single second of regret. Story 9. Went on a camping trip with friends. Loved the place where we camped. I was 18. Went home, packed all my belongings, moved to the next state over, and lived there for over 20 years. Great friends, great job, and a quiet life. Story 10. In 2016, I was pregnant with my second child, and my mom, sister, and my family of 3 moved from California to New Mexico. It was rough. We moved 2 dogs, 2 cats, and a huge fish. In 2021, we all moved to Arkansas. Bentonville is too small for what Walmart is trying to do there. The traffic is ridiculous. In July 2022, we moved our 3 dogs, cat, and family of 4 to Joplin, Missouri. It has been the roughest 3 years of my life. I am now divorced and have found my soulmate. My children, my ex's lives, and mine are so much better. My mom lives 15 minutes away, and we are now no contact. I am 45 and starting over. Feels great. I got away from my toxic mom and sister. I had no idea I had been so controlled for 9 years. My life has calmed down so much since I went no contact a month ago. Life is hard, but I would not change any of it. I have met some amazing people and had some, and still do have experiences I never would have had otherwise. Story 11. I was born in Tucson, Arizona, and lived there for 65 years. We received the help, "We are pregnant" call from our son and daughter-in-law. He had just graduated from college and she was in medical school. We moved 1,800 miles to Rochester, Minnesota, for 4 years. The winters were very harsh. Then we followed them another 1,800 miles to Bellingham, Washington. We helped take care of the now 2 grandchildren, ages 5 and 7. We live 2 miles from the port. Yesterday, the summer high was 89 degrees, compared to 111 back in Tucson. I thought I was going to die as a desert native in Tucson. Cheers to my son and family for bringing us out of hell. Story 12. Moved from England to the United States back in 1998. It was a good move. Life changed for the better. I am just going to ignore the fire going on around me and leave it at that. Story 13. I moved out of state in 2000 for a job because where I grew up would not support my occupation. 25 years later, life is considerably better. It was the best decision I have made. Story 14. In 2013, after college, I couldn't get an entry-level job in the Wilmington, Philadelphia, Baltimore area. I followed my dad to Denver for a conference and visited tech companies with my resume in hand. I got an on-the-spot interview and landed a product support job. That foot in the door gave me the opportunity to become a product manager. It led to opportunities to work in the cannabis technology industry, be acquired by competitors, and buy my first home. Always bet on yourself. No one else will. Story 15. Left an extended family that all lived within 30 miles of each other for the most part back in 2008 since we could not afford that high cost of living and waiting to start our lives was stretching into more than 5 years at this point. For us, it worked out great. Better climate, better area, in my opinion. Bought our first house, raised a family, no regrets. I will say that having zero family support was hard, and having to make new friends is not easy for me. Story 16. I would do it in a heartbeat, but I have an elderly father, my daughter, and grandchildren. Not a day goes by that I do not think of it. Story 17. My life has been much better than I could have ever hoped to achieve back home. I face new and unique challenges, such as loneliness from living in a new country, but that also brings adventure. I lived in the United States for 23 years and now have lived in Canada for 23 years. My situation is largely due to escaping a dysfunctional family and having access to public health care. These 2 factors have made life much easier. I could not have predicted how much I would need health care, but in the United States I would have been overwhelmed by debt. However, I did anticipate how much my mental health would improve by leaving behind abusive family dynamics. Story 18. Threw some clothes in a duffel bag and moved from Tehran to rural Indiana. Life is pretty great. I'm living beyond my wildest dreams. Story 19. Wonderful. I'm on the West Coast in Silicon Valley and no longer surrounded by any MAGA hat wearing, Bible thumping, SEAL Team 6 cosplaying Southeasterners. I miss my family because they're stuck there. Homes, children, debt, and familiarity are keeping them there. I would go back only reluctantly and only if they increased my salary significantly. Politics aside, no more humidity, walkable areas, public transit, and no shaming for using it. Seriously, I had many coworkers and community members back east who thought public transit is for the poor and a waste. I was able to live like this because I was healthy, debt-free, had no property, was single, had no kids, and my family was healthy enough to live and survive without me. I love visiting home, but it would take a lot to get me to move back. Story 20. I'm not sure this quite applies, but I moved a couple of states over in the United States for college, and it was a wonderful experience moving somewhere where I knew basically no one at that time in life. I think that experience was invaluable for personal growth and on the ever-present journey of self-exploration. I still have contact with some good friends over a decade later as well. I did move back home for a job, then out of my parents' house with friends in town for a few years, and then eventually left that town to eliminate the commute, so I am only an hour and a half or so from where I grew up. I probably would have moved to Japan after my divorce, but my children are here, and with my parents here, I know I want to be relatively close as they age to take care of them as the eldest child. Story 21. I packed up and left the United States in 1998 and moved to Ireland. Life seemed to be working fine, but I wanted to try something different. I ended up with a far better quality of life and will hopefully be retiring at age 54 or 55. Story 22. Fabulous. I lived in San Francisco for a decade, Seattle for a few years, and New York City for over 20 years. It has been quite a series of adventures. Story 23. I had been dating my now husband for a year long distance. I decided to uproot everything and move to his state. I do not regret it in the least. We have been together nearly 20 years, have awesome pets, no children, and very good jobs that we have held for years. We bought our first home in 2015. The state we live in is politically challenging, but we have a good life for the most part. Story 24. Got out of Ohio back in 2005 when it became apparent the state was quickly turning Republican. Very happy in Democratic Vermont for the last 20 years. Story 25. Moved from Nebraska after living there for 29 years. I'm so glad I left. That place is stagnant and people are very judgmental. My husband and I have been living the RV life. We lived in Florida for a year and a half, visited Alabama for a couple of months, and now we're in Oklahoma. We are moving to California soon. We also bought land in Colorado. The possibilities are endless. We're only going back to Nebraska to get the rest of my belongings that have been in storage. Then we will never go back. Story 26. Great. I am Zimbabwean. I left in 2000, worked a few years in France, and am now living in Dubai. I love it and would not move back. Turned out well despite some tough years. I feel very blessed and grateful for my life. Story 27. It has only been about 2 years, but so far it has been fantastic. I am at a job I love. I feel like I do not have to hide who I am. The overall culture here fits us much better. Story 28. I was living in Manhattan and just loving big city life. I met a very intelligent, beautiful woman from the West Coast and, after a few weeks, moved cross-country to be near her. I am still with her and very happy, although I do miss New York City. I am the luckiest man in the world. Story 29. I did exactly that. I moved from France to Denmark. On one hand, I moved to a place where I feel much more accepted and respected in all my dimensions, in who I am and want to be. The political culture is also much more in tune with me. On the other hand, I took a significant setback in career development. Now that I am living here and in therapy, I can also understand why, at least one more hidden reason, I needed to move away from France. I needed to move away from my parents and my family to be more independent and be my own self. That is painful. There is a lot to work on. Note that I am now on good terms with my family. Story 30. St. Joseph, Missouri was hell on earth. I moved to Portland, Oregon in March. My life has been much better so far. Story 31. Great. I left the East Coast for the West Coast at 25 and never looked back. I love living 2,500 miles away from that chaos. Living near family is difficult. Story 32. My comfort zone was suffocating me. I needed to move away and start anew. Being far from my support network made me self-sufficient. I owned all of my wins and losses. Story 33. In May, I moved 3 hours from home. I went from a city of 80,000 to 3,000. No regrets. My mental health is better than it has ever been. Story 34. I was a military child, so I moved around a lot. As an adult, I do not like being anywhere for more than a few years, so I continue to move as often as I can afford to. I find the concept of a single place to stay forever very unfamiliar. Story 35. Not sure if this qualifies, but we are doing pretty well. I met my husband online and met him in his home country while on vacation in September. We connected instantly like love at first sight. We had both agreed it would just be a casual relationship between friends, but by the end of the week, we were head over heels. He proposed in December and we got married in March. It was fast and not something I recommend anyone do. I really hated my life back in the United States. Before I took this vacation, and one of the reasons I took the vacation, I realized I was unsatisfied and wrote down a list of things I wanted to do. I wanted to get a better job, finish school, get married, buy a house, have a child, pay off my car, and really get my life together. I did all that, just in an entirely different country than I intended. It was easier here too. It will be 17 years since we met in person next month, and I could not be happier with how my life is now. Story 36. I did exactly this in 2005. We had one thing too many go wrong, and I decided it was the powers that be trying to tell me something, so we moved 400 miles north to the city my sister was living in at the time. It was not the smoothest transition, but it turned out to be a really good move. I feel like we develop a lot of unhealthy patterns in the process of growing up, and for some of us, it is hard to get out of those without some kind of drastic change. I experimented with selling the stuff I make at Renaissance fairs and on Etsy, earned a couple of degrees, got some help for anxiety and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and gained a lot of confidence. My ex-husband is in a much better place. He had lost 3 jobs before we moved, but he has been with the same company for 19.5 years now. The adjustment was harder for my son, but he is also doing really well. Me getting mentally healthier was the most important thing for my kids, and I do not know if I would have gotten there without moving. Going back to school and being far away from my safety net forced me to deal with things in a way I had not had to previously. It is a little scary to think about where my ex might be right now if we had not moved. Story 37. Moved cross-country after college because I had always felt drawn to that part of the country. It was everything I had hoped for. I met the love of my life. We have 3 children. No complaints. I knew where my people were, and I was right. Definitely miss my original family. The distance is hard. I would not change a thing. Story 38. I have moved from New England to Los Angeles to New England to the San Francisco Bay Area to the Pacific Northwest. That's kind of old. No, wait, that's me. Story 39. Born and raised in Canada. I sold everything and moved with my 3 cats to southern Spain, where my heritage is. Much happier. Story 40. I was bored with my life in my hometown. I got a job offer 1,000 miles away and left with 2 weeks' notice. I packed as much as I could into my car and left. I picked up some new hobbies, met a few girls, and learned to enjoy new foods and interests. I settled down after a while and now I have a house, wife, kids, dogs, some bikes, and a couple of cars. I'm good. Travel and do big things when you're young. Once you get older, it's not very easy. Story 41. In 2008, I dropped out of college, got in my car, and drove 3,000 miles away. Now I am retired at 38. It worked out pretty well, in my opinion. Story 42. I hated where I grew up and could not wait to get out, since I just do not think I was ever suited for small-town life. My life would be very small and extremely unfulfilling if I had never left to attend university. Additionally, I met both my husband and some of my dearest, oldest friends while attending school and in the jobs I worked afterward. Story 43. Great. After returning from several locations overseas, we bought a house and stayed a long time. We recently moved again to a very different place than either of us has ever lived. We followed jobs, pay, promotions in different industries and fields before, during, and after having children. We didn't have family close to us where we went to college, or where our first jobs after college were located, nor overseas or where we settled when we came home or here. We never felt tied to a place or any people. There wasn't what you would call loving, supportive, normal family dynamics or any structure or sense of belonging. We went looking for what we needed and then were able to give that and more to our own children. Were the moves always easy and trouble-free? Was the grass always greener? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We definitely learned, grew, progressed, and matured along the way. We and our children are far better off now than if we had just stayed right where we were. Do it for yourself, do it for the right reasons. Run towards something, not away from everything or away from yourself. You're bringing yourself and your literal and figurative baggage along with you. So make sure it's in good order and ready to go. Skill up, prepare, know before you go, visit, vacation, rent before you buy. Have a job or something else like education to anchor you there. Story 44. Like this. Completely different region, different culture. I haven't made any friends here. The region I left is now booming, and the region I live in now is facing decay. Everyone left. Only elderly people remain here. Infrastructure is deteriorating. With my current salary, there is no way I would be able to afford anything more than my current 32 million. I am already in the top 10% income bracket, so I don't see any way to increase it. Unfortunately, I already have an apartment under mortgage here, and my wife is pregnant. Also, I will not be paid as much as I am paid now in my home region. I plan to close the mortgage, sell the apartment, and buy something very decent in my hometown. Or maybe I will keep this apartment, rent it out for passive income, and buy something decent in my hometown if I manage to stay here longer. But I miss home. Story 45. The first time I was 18 and moved 1,000 miles from everything I had ever known for a man I met in military training. I ended up back where I started pretty quickly, drained of my life savings and dignity. What a roller coaster that was. But somehow life got even crazier after I left Florida. I have essentially started over a couple of times since then, but still stayed local to home. I am about to do it again in a few weeks, moving to the opposite corner of the country. I am terrified, but I have never been so excited in my life. I am in my mid-30s and very tired of not living the life I want to live, so I am changing it. As for how it will turn out, I guess we will find out soon. Story 46. Best decision I ever made. The southern region is largely undesirable, and the positive aspects that emerge from it have done so despite the culture, not because of it. Story 47. I did it a few months ago. I quit my job of 10 years where I climbed the ranks despite challenges. I was miserable there. People knew I wasn't happy, so I quit to become an artist full-time. I left friends behind and even lost friends I loved and considered family. Everything was uprooted in my life at once, so I made the leap to uproot more and move away. Since April, I have been living in the woods in a small cabin in the Pacific Northwest, just as I had strongly and constantly imagined a year before. I wouldn't say manifestation is the only way, but I pictured myself in that spot exactly, and that is where I am now, even though I didn't feel ready at all. It has worked out so far, and I have sold more artwork lately. I am happier beyond words and now surrounded by people I never knew. I still struggle with feeling overwhelmed and incapable, but I am happy creating my art because I changed my life. Story 48. A friend of mine moved across the country to my state. We met. I introduced her to my friend group. She is now happily married with a baby girl and a sweet dog. I would say things are pretty good. Story 49. Most people I know who did that say it was the best thing they ever did eventually. When you move, you give yourself permission to rewrite your story. New place, new routines, and new friends. You get to be whoever you want without people holding you to who you were. Of course, there are hard days. Homesickness hits out of nowhere. You might feel lonely while everyone else seems settled, but if you stick with it, you start noticing little wins. The funny thing is, most people I have talked to did not just change their location. They changed themselves. Story 50. Moved from New York City to Denver 4 years ago because the city stopped feeling like home during COVID-19. Denver is fine. I am looking for jobs elsewhere because I feel out of place here, and that feeling has not gone away the whole 4 years. Story 51. I moved 12 hours from where I grew up when I turned 18. I have been in a happy relationship for more than a decade. I have a child and a good job. I am not afraid to say that transgender people have a right to exist. Story 52. Wonderful. I have built an amazing life. I have relocated 3 more times to make a good life even better, and each time it was worth it. I am just about to do it again. Story 53. Moved from the Houston area to the Seattle area 13 years ago. Had about 4 or 5 years when things were very tight financially while I built a new career. After my wife and I both completed school and worked our way up from the bottom, we have excellent careers. We own our home and travel a lot. We recently dropped off our child at college, where he is in an honors pre-veterinary program after attending a private grade school. I had grown tired of the stressful environment, the heat, and not living in the best neighborhood. Moving across the country, even during difficult times, solved all of that. We experienced some extremely stressful moments, but I would endure that again to be where I am now. Story 54. I was 13 and living in Iowa City, where my father was studying for his Doctor of Philosophy degree. I was born and raised in Nebraska. He had every intention of teaching at the university level somewhere in the United States. This was in 1969, a very turbulent time with the war in Vietnam that both my parents detested, especially my mother. My younger brother and I were not old enough for the draft, but my mother did not want to leave anything to chance. She was adamant that her sons would not have to fight in a war. It turned out that my father was offered a teaching job at the University of Winnipeg in Canada. After some discussion, both my parents decided to make the move. I am a Canadian citizen now and consider Winnipeg my home. I think it was the best decision we could have made as a family. The United States is declining in many unfathomable ways, and I am glad I am not living there. I just have to contend with the brutal winters on the prairies. But on the plus side, there is federal health care. Story 55. Packed up and moved about 2 kilometers away. I decided to do this because I was performing poorly at my job and going through a divorce from my partner. A new job opened up for me, and I thought, screw it. Let's go for it. In the first year, I was fortunate to find a group of people to hang out with almost every Friday evening. By the second year, I was considering moving back but ultimately chose to stay. Now, in my 4th year, it has worked out incredibly well. Moving forced me to work on myself, which I needed more than I cared to admit. If you have never done something like this before and are considering it, I suggest you try a short 6-month period first to see how well you adapt. If possible, take the opportunity to study abroad for a semester. I did poorly in my studies but learned what worked and what didn't, which made me more confident about moving as far as I did when I did. Let me know if you have any specific questions I can try to answer. Story 56. Would have been better staying, in my opinion. Financially, I moved at the start of the financial crisis. It took me years to make the equivalent of what I was earning before I left. My pension started from zero. Family-wise, my time with them is no longer measured in years together, but in how many visits I will have. Socially, you never recover the types of friends I had in my late teens and early adulthood. Those are the people you go through all the awkward times with and see the best and worst of each other. You never find that again. Everyone else you meet as an adult only sees a facade of who you have become, not who you were. Sometimes you run away thinking you are making mistakes, but you are still the same person and can still make the same mistakes. You are just somewhere now where you are alone and without a foundation beneath you. Story 57. Moved to the southeast from the northwest. I live a much more comfortable middle-class life now because everything is much cheaper, but it is very hot. Oh, and the racists. Story 58. Great, but I do not think I had any deep roots to pull up. Not everything will grow wherever it is planted. I only began to thrive when I transplanted to a sunny spot with more suitable soil. Story 59. I got fired on my way to Mardi Gras 2008. I lived in my car for a while. I met a nice girl. We hiked the Appalachian Trail together. We bought 40 acres and a marijuana farm. Pretty good, I would say. Story 60. Could not get out of 1960s North Carolina soon enough. Ended up in California. Have to say, North Carolina has better fishing. California is better in all other ways for me. Oklahoma houses are too expensive and rent too high. Story 61. Moved to a new place with $30 after flights and rent. I had no job lined up and had never been here before. I moved with a suitcase and my personal computer. I am now married with 2 children and starting my own business. Story 62. Worked out fine in the long term, but you realize some things don't change because the problem is you. You can escape your hometown, but you also need to be open-minded about changing yourself. For example, I knew a man who was bullied and moved away only to be bullied again. Some people are bully magnets, just like some people date one alcoholic after another. Story 63. Moved 5 states at 19 with a suitcase and a duffel bag. I had a lot of support then, and in the years since, from a few extended family members. It was 100% the right choice. Story 64. I put all my belongings in my car last year and had them transported 3,000 miles from West Virginia to California to stay with a friend in their guest room while I figured my life out. It was the best decision I have ever made, to be honest. Story 65. Great. Probably the best thing I have ever done apart from having my children. I did not know anyone. I just moved there because I liked it there when I went on holiday. Now my life is completely different and so much better. Story 66. I moved across the country to attend law school. I miss my family and friends back home, and it took a while to find my footing. I realized I still have some of the same problems here that I had at home. However, I am in a new place with new opportunities, and honestly, I have not looked back. Story 67. I took a small suitcase and got in a car. 12 hours later, I was starting over in a new state and knew only 3 people who brought me here. 8 years later, I am married, have a mortgage, a child, and another on the way. I have a better job, and most importantly, I am extremely happy. If I had stayed where I am from, I would probably be dead or in jail. Story 68. Moved from the largest city in my state to a rural area within the state. It is the best decision I have made as an adult. Story 69. Worked out great for me. I moved around a lot after growing up in a really small place. I ended up in London making good money but not enjoying what I was doing. I packed everything up, sold almost all my stuff and went backpacking around Australia. I met my now husband there. We traveled the world together for 5 years and then settled down in Eastern Canada. Great neighbors, great friends, great village. Couldn't have worked out better. Story 70. Awesome. I left to check out the coast, ostensibly for the summer, and never left. I had a great kid and struggled while he was growing up, but we were happy. Now I have a fantastic job, a life full of love, friends, and adventure, and I live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. I would have suffocated had I stayed. Story 71. I left my hometown at 19 and moved in with my aunt who lived in a big city. I took nothing but my car and a large suitcase with all my essential belongings. I got a job and saved enough money to move in with my partner, who had moved to the next state over for work. I joined her there after 6 months of working and saving. Both moves were the best decisions of my life. I cannot imagine how bleak things would have been if I had tried to stay where my family was. I was raised in a cult-like fundamentalist conservative Christian religion that dominated most of the town. I realized I was queer at 18 years old and already wanted to leave the church I was raised in. I knew I had to leave the entire area behind in order to live my life fully and be happy. Story 72. Left for the military at 23. Landed in a difficult place for 5 years and did not have a good time. Got out and went back home for a bit, then headed out west. I have been out here for a couple of years. I am still unpacking things from my childhood. I was recently diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from that and from events that happened in the military. Story 73. More or less 20 years ago, I met my now wife. After dating for a bit, she said, "Hey, I'm getting a new job back in my home state. Do you want to get married and move with me?" I had a job that I didn't care for but worked in information technology, so I figured anywhere would be fine. I've now been at my current company for almost 19 years, in 3 different roles as we grew the information technology team here. It is not as information technology related as some information technology jobs, but it is in an industry that I personally have a lot of interest in, and the team I work with is fun, so I'm pretty happy. I also just realized that I followed the opposite of the I lived in a small town and moved to the big city to pursue my dreams story. Where I am now, hobbies include raising animals to eat and hunting animals to eat. Story 74. I guess I am different because my family moved countries when I was 16, from the United States of America to France. Even though they moved back when I was 19, I did not feel like that city was home anymore. I had already gone to college a few states away, and when I got married, my wife and I decided where we would end up. Neither of us wanted to go back to where we grew up, Iowa for me and California for her. After living in Arizona, we moved to Utah and have been here for 17 years now. Also, my parents moved from Iowa 10 years ago, and her parents moved from California 15 years ago, so there is really nothing holding us to either state anymore. Story 75. It turned out really well. I moved back eventually, but my years away were excellent, and I'll remember them fondly. Story 76. I moved from central Iowa to middle Tennessee 12 years ago. I suffered from severe seasonal affective disorder for 2 decades before I left. It has almost completely disappeared now. I am not enthusiastic about the politics here or in Iowa currently, but it was definitely the right decision to leave. Story 77. I left the small city on the Canadian prairies where I grew up and moved to the West Coast. Absolutely no regrets. Story 78. My mom did that. It was very difficult, but finding supportive people will make it possible and worth it for sure. Story 79. Moved 120 miles west, and not only is the cost of living much cheaper, but there is also significantly less crime. I went from renting a 1-bedroom apartment to being able to buy a house with a big yard. Story 80. It turned out really well for me. I moved to a new state for graduate school. I had applied before to local programs but was not getting in because they were competitive, my application was not strong enough, and my interests did not align well with the faculty there. I knew schools across the rest of the country were good too, so why limit myself? If I had applied to a wider selection of schools and gone somewhere else that was good, then I would have been back by now or halfway done at the time. So I just went for it. Story 81. I wanted to move away as early as possible. The first time was when I was 16, moving a 5-hour drive away from my family and everything I knew. It wasn't perfect, and I made a lot of mistakes, but it was exactly what I needed and played a huge part in shaping me into the person I am today. The second time, I made a very blind jump into the unknown by moving to another country with very little planning right when the coronavirus pandemic began. That turned out amazingly well for me, and now I am very happy with my life. I got really lucky with the job I found, and I am grateful that my boss took a chance on me. I don't think I would still be alive if I had stayed, so it was definitely the right decision. Story 82. I decided to pull away and move because I felt stuck and burned out. At first, it was just about changing my surroundings, but it ended up being a complete reset. New city, new job, new people, and suddenly all the things that weighed me down before just became background noise. Sometimes stepping away is the only way to find yourself again. Story 83. I moved only 1 state away, but it is enough to maintain a healthy distance from most of my family. I can still feel my mental and physical health improving. Story 84. Moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Tulsa, Oklahoma during the pandemic and do not regret it for a moment. Job prospects were not great in Georgia. Here, I run my own business in the field I want to work in with livestock, bringing my dog to work with me. Dating is probably harder here, but I met my boyfriend soon after moving, so it is not an issue for me. Also, marijuana is medically legal and widely available, and having access to that medicine has improved my life significantly. The cost of living is also easier to manage here, and since I am young, that is important to me as I save money. That being said, my partner and I plan on moving north in the next few years. It is hot here, very hot. My body cannot take it anymore, but I do not want to stop working outdoors, so we will have to move again. Story 85. I moved 250 miles away 35 years ago. I have never regretted it. There is nothing to do in my hometown, and people I know who are still there have had their lives go nowhere. They still hang out with the same people, have the same friends, and have boring jobs and boring lives. Story 86. I have been doing this repeatedly my whole life. I am just about to do it again. I am talking about moves of 1,000 to 2,000 miles, not just the next town over. I am in the United States, so it is not as crazy as it sounds. It is great. I get to experience new places, new foods, meet new people, and visit incredible places that many people need a vacation to see, but I can just pop over. There are negatives too, but they are not a huge deal. When I moved to where I am now, I found out that I do get seasonal allergies. I had never lived near cottonwood trees before. It is really irritating going through the process of finding my new favorite pizza, Mexican, Chinese, and Indian takeout. Since I was 10 years old, I have moved from an eastern state to another eastern state, to the Midwest, back to an eastern state, another eastern state, Texas, the Midwest, an eastern state, the Midwest, a western state, and my next move will be to the mid-north. Story 87. It was the best decision my wife and I made. Better weather, better jobs. Met some great people, left the drama behind. Story 88. I left Singapore and moved to Switzerland. That was probably the best decision of my life. It has been 3 years, and I have no desire to return permanently, although I would visit for the food. Story 89. I moved 1,000 miles away from the Midwest to the West. So far, it is going great. I am a transgender man in a gay marriage, and my husband and I are treated much better here. The school system is better as well. My autistic daughter can now spend an entire day in the classroom, which she could not do before. I also make more money here. The cost of living is high, but in comparison, I am actually able to save more money than when I lived in the Midwest. Because of the lack of humidity, I have adopted an outdoorsman lifestyle and have lost a significant amount of weight. I am happier and healthier, and so is the rest of my family. It is difficult to uproot from the Midwest, not only because it is harder to save enough money to relocate to a more expensive place, but also because that is where my home and soul were for the first 30 years of my life. Story 90. Left the Boston area for the San Francisco Bay Area when I was 24. It was the best decision I ever made for my life. This is partly because I entered the internet explosion and found good work quickly, which led to a career. But even setting that aside, I met people and experienced things that expanded the course of my life immeasurably. I believe I would be a much smaller and simpler person if I had stayed where I grew up. Story 91. Not me, but my husband. He moved away from the Midwest to the South. He had no real idea of where he was going, just somewhere with a low cost of living. He ended up in the South, met me, and has been here ever since. It made him grow up fast. Story 92. Bad at first. Good now, though. I left the Midwest in the late 1990s and moved to the East Coast. After a failed relationship, I slept in my car for a few months. I finally found a place to live and stayed there for 17 years, but I was not happy. I was repeating the cycle I had lived through back home, working 60 to 80 hours every week, trying to stay afloat, trying to keep a roof over my head so I could keep working so I would not lose the roof over my head, the usual soul-killing struggles everyone deals with. The cycle circled back again, and I almost lost that roof. That time, it hit me hard. I realized I was either going to end up permanently homeless, which is not a good situation for someone with social anxiety disorder, or I would somehow make it to retirement and spend the rest of my life staring out a window overlooking a brick wall. I knew I had to break the cycle. I spent 5 years saving $8,001 to buy 3.6 acres of undeveloped land, and another 5 years saving to buy what I needed to live on it. Then I discarded most of my belongings and lived in a tent for 3 months while I built my cabin. That was almost exactly 8 years ago. It has been the best 8 years of my entire life. It has done wonders for my mental health and my self-respect. I still have a lot to do, and it is a rough life at times, but what I lost in convenience and comfort I have gained in happiness and confidence. Story 93. I moved from the Pacific Northwest to Michigan after college for a job working at one of the automakers. While there were many things that I loved about living there, I did not love Michigan. It was flat, boring, dirty, and the weather was terrible. After 7 years, I took a pay cut to move back to the Pacific Northwest and was almost immediately happier. Instead of being on the other side of the country, My family could be reached within a half-day drive in either direction, and I was surrounded by places where I could hike, bike, ski, and explore. I grew a lot from my time away from home, but I learned that there are some things I just cannot live without. Story 94. Amazingly, 6 years later, I would not go back for all the money in the world. Moving away or starting over gives you perspective. Story 95. Mixed bag. We have a good life, but it is lonely. We were not close to many friends back home, and we have basically no friends here. We miss our families, but they probably would have driven us crazy if we had stayed. The economics make sense, so overall it is the right choice. Story 96. Born and raised in Australia. Married at 28. At 29, in 2009, my wife and I moved to Canada on a 2-year working holiday visa with 4 suitcases between us. We obtained professional jobs that paid more than our positions in Australia. We gained expert-level experience with specialized information technology systems. We stayed for 7.5 years on various visas, obtained permanent residency, and then citizenship. We moved back to Australia in 2016 with 4 suitcases and 2 cubic meters of belongings shipped back. We had a substantial down payment saved for a house, secured an excellent job with the experience gained in Canada, bought a house, and had a child. Life is great. Story 97. I moved countries 11 years ago, sold everything, started fresh, and left friends and family. There was nothing holding me there anymore. I need to fly. Story 98. It has been almost 10 years since I left. Although things around me are good, I am happily married, have a good group of friends, am taking up hobbies, and have a nice job. In my head, I am still unlearning a lot of bad mindsets and thinking habits from where I was raised. I go to therapy whenever I can afford it, but it is still rough sometimes. Story 99. Way better. Now I go back home and I miss it instead of hating it. I am proud of myself for getting through some difficult times with money. I feel less afraid about life changes moving forward. I do not feel as threatened by things. I will deal. Story 100. After reading these, I am thinking more and more about how incredibly big the world is and how little we all get to see of it. I want to start traveling the world with my wife and children. Story 101. Packed everything I could fit into suitcases and moved to Japan with my family almost a decade ago. It has been hard but good. I would not trade it. Story 102. Moved me and my 2 toddlers to Seattle from Montana. I had planned to stay with my father, but he said no. So we went to a homeless shelter. I got a job at Costco and my own place 3 weeks later. It has been upward ever since. Story 103. I moved to Taiwan from the United States after the job market declined. I love it here, but without my original friends and family, it is easy to feel depressed. I feel like if my partner lived here instead of doing a long-distance relationship, it would be much easier. I am medicated, I go to therapy, I have a great life, but I am still feeling depressed. Story 104. I joined the military to leave my small town and never looked back. It was the best decision I ever made. Story 105. My entire life, I was stuck in a toxic family dynamic where I was the scapegoat child for my raging narcissistic father and emotionally checked out mother. It was exhausting both mentally and physically. I knew I would break if I stayed, and I almost did from the stress of my family's repercussions. They unsuccessfully tried stealing my cats and attempted to financially manipulate me. I lost 15 pounds over 3 months from the stress of it all. They didn't even give me the option of having a proper goodbye, as I had to steal my cats back in the middle of the night and leave. Operation Catnapped. I ended up moving 2,000 miles away with my beautiful partner who supported me throughout all of this and has been my absolute rock. The food here is amazing. The nature is stunning. And I'm finally on a career path, working toward my future with the person I love most. For the first time in my life, I can truly say I am happy and both emotionally and physically safe. It's kind of funny because I have 2 friends from high school who became a couple and are in a similar situation. After they came to visit, they are determined to start a life here too. If you are in a difficult situation, I promise it gets better. Hold on to hope, find those who can support you now, and look for your exit. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.